Welcome to today's deep dive. Imagine a workforce completely surrounded by bright, blazing sunlight, like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right.
Yet somehow they're suffering from a crippling deficiency of this sunshine vitamin.
Yeah, it sounds completely impossible.
It really does. But today we are looking at a maritime paradox that is secretly sabotaging the health of global seafarers. And honestly, it's costing the shipping industry millions upon millions of dollars in entirely preventable losses.
It is, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating occupational blind spots in modern logistics. We are pulling from a really brilliant piece of analysis published in the Deep Draft.
Yeah, written by Captain Raghu Sharma.
Exactly, a serving master mariner. He takes something that most of us view as a totally mundane health metric, vitamin D, and maps out how its absence creates a massive catastrophic domino effect across global supply chains.
Because, I mean, if you were running a billion-dollar logistics company, you would track every single drop of fuel your ships burn.
Oh, absolutely.
You'd monitor the engine temperature, the weather patterns, the exact minute a cargo container hits the dock. But as this source reveals, these same companies are completely ignoring the basic biological fuel of the people actually steering those ships.
Yeah, they really are.
So our mission today is to uncover exactly why this happens. We're going to dive into how a microscopic chemical deficit forces giant cargo ships to alter course and, what that reveals about the limits of corporate wellness programs.
The central premise here really forces you to separate the macro environment from the micro-occupational reality. I mean, we picture the open ocean and we just think of endless UV exposure.
Right.
But the daily life of a seafarer is designed in a way that actively isolates them from that exact environment.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yep.
Because I am looking at these numbers from the article, and I just have to stop and figure out the basic physics of it. A sailor lives on a ship.
Yeah.
The ship is outside. It's like a baker running out of flour while living inside a mill. How are they not absorbing sunlight?
Well, to understand that, you really have to look at the structural reality of a modern commercial vessel. Let's start with the engineering crew, for example.
Okay.
A modern cargo ship is not a sailboat. It is an enormous floating industrial power plant.
Right, it's massive.
Yeah, and the engineers and oilers, they spend virtually their entire working day and often their overtime deep inside the ship's engine rooms.
Which are completely enclosed steel vaults.
Exactly. They're operating in spaces that are deafeningly loud, often exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit and just entirely devoid of natural light. There are no skylights in the engine control room. An engineering crew could sail from Singapore to Rotterdam through the brightest, most sun-drenched tropical latitudes imaginable, and they simply wouldn't see a single natural photon of light during their shifts.
I mean, that makes perfect sense for the engineers.
Yeah.
They are essentially working a subterranean job that just happens to be floating. But that only accounts for a fraction of the crew. You still have the deck officers, the able seamen, the people actively navigating and maintaining the exterior of the vessel. They are standing under the open sky.
What's fascinating here is that the industry's own safety regulations create an unintended biological barrier for those exact people.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, when a deck crew is working outside, they are operating in a highly hazardous industrial zone. They're dealing with snapping mooring lines, corrosive chemicals, heavy steel cargo.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
So to protect them from acute trauma, maritime safety regulations require them to be completely covered in personal protective equipment.
So they're wearing, like, thick coveralls, heavy steel-toe boots, hard hats, heavy-duty industrial gloves.
Right. Think of their PPE as a Faraday cage for sunlight.
Oh, wow.
The heavy cotton and specialized synthetic fibers do an excellent job of protecting the skin from immediate hazards like chemical splashes or hot oil. But in doing so, they completely block out the very specific frequencies of light the human body needs.
Because the skin needs a certain type of UV.
Exactly. It requires ultraviolet B radiation, specifically in the 200 and 315 nanometer wavelength, to synthesize vitamin D. And that radiation simply cannot penetrate industrial safety gear.
But what about the guys driving the ship? Even if a deck officer is navigating from inside the wheelhouse on the bridge, the sunlight streaming through the windows isn't actually helping them, is it?
No, it actually isn't. Standard maritime bridge glass is highly specialized. It has to withstand hurricane-force winds and brutal temperature shifts.
Right.
The physics of that thick glass means it filters out nearly all UVB radiation. The visible light gets through so they can see, but the biological catalyst does not.
That is wild. And you combine that structural isolation with the geography of global shipping. Because these vessels aren't just cruising the Caribbean.
No, not at all.
They run high-latitude routes across the North Atlantic or the North Pacific. And if you are sailing in those waters during the winter months, the angle of the sun is so low that the atmosphere absorbs most of the UVB rays before they even hit the surface of the ocean.
Yeah, there is a general rule of thumb in dermatology. If your shadow is longer than you are, your body isn't producing vitamin D.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so for seafarers on these winter routes, they could stand naked on the deck at noon and still not synthesize what they need. And because they can't get it from the sun, they are entirely reliant on their diet.
Which, on a cargo ship crossing the Pacific for 30 or 40 days at a time is incredibly limited.
Yeah.
I mean, the cook isn't exactly running down to the local farmer's market every morning.
Exactly. Shipboard provisioning relies heavily on dry stores and frozen meats that can survive a multi-month voyage. Fresh produce runs out quickly.
Yeah.
And crucially, the foods naturally rich in vitamin D, like fresh, oily fish, are really difficult to stock consistently. Furthermore, unlike consumer supply chains on land, maritime bulk provisions rarely include dairy products that are artificially fortified with vitamin D.
So the nutritional safety net just isn't
It
there.
really isn't.
So the mechanics of the deficiency totally make sense.
Mhm.
You have an ironclad combination of windowless engine rooms, UV-blocking safety gear, extreme latitudes, and a diet relying on non-perishable food.
Right.
But I have to ask the skeptical question here, as someone listening to this might wonder, is it really an epidemic, though? Surely a slight deficiency is just a minor inconvenience, not a full-blown crisis. I mean, millions of people working in corporate office buildings in London or Seattle are deficient in vitamin D, and companies aren't collapsing because of it.
Well, it is the combination of the severity of the deficiency and the intense physical demands of the job. This isn't just a slight dip in levels that makes someone feel a little sluggish at a desk.
Okay.
Captain Sharma points to a major German study that tested European seafarers, and the results were staggering. They found that 76% of the seafarers tested were deficient or insufficient in vitamin D.
76%. That's more than 3/4 of the workforce.
Yeah, and of that group, 1 in 4 were categorized as severely deficient. This was also corroborated by the E-Healthy Ship project. They looked at Filipino and Burmese crews, who represent a massive demographic within global shipping, and found their dietary intake fell vastly below recommended minimums.
Let's unpack the biology of what that severe deficiency actually does to a human being.
Yeah.
Because when we hear vitamin deficiency, we tend to think of, minor ailments. We don't realize that vitamin D acts much more like a hormone in the human body than a traditional vitamin.
That is the critical distinction. Vitamin D is essential for the gut to absorb calcium. Without adequate levels of vitamin D circulating in your system, your intestines can only absorb about 10 to 15% of the calcium you consume.
That's nothing.
Right. But your body absolutely needs calcium to keep your heart beating and your nerves firing.
Ugh.
So if it isn't getting it from your diet, it goes to the only reservoir it has, your bones.
Oh, jeez.
It actively leaches calcium out of your skeletal system to maintain blood levels.
Which is terrifying when you apply it to a sailor. I mean, if an office worker has slightly weaker bones, they might never notice it sitting in an ergonomic chair.
Exactly.
But an able seaman is outside on a rolling deck in a gale, hauling steel cables and heavy lashing gear.
Precisely. Under those intense industrial loads, that bone loss translates instantly to chronic back pain, early onset osteoporosis, and a massive spike in the risk of stress fractures.
That sounds brutal.
It is. A sailor's skeleton is structurally weakening while they are performing the heaviest manual labor imaginable.
And the physical toll doesn't stop at the musculoskeletal system. The source heavily emphasizes the immune system crash.
Yeah, absolutely. Vitamin D is a vital signaling molecule for your immune defenses. Your macrophages, the cells that detect and destroy pathogens, they require vitamin D to produce antimicrobial proteins.
Oh, I see.
When a sailor is severely deficient, their baseline immunity plummets. They become incredibly vulnerable to respiratory infections like colds, bronchitis, and pneumonia, alongside skin issues like eczema.
Which is the absolute worst-case scenario when you live in a sealed environment.
Oh, completely.
You have 25 people living in tight quarters, sharing the same mess hall, breathing the same recirculated air from the ship's HVAC system. When one person's immune system fails, the resulting infection can just tear through the entire crew.
And when an illness tears through a crew, that biological failure transforms into a catastrophic financial failure. This is really the turning point in the analysis.
Right.
Because the harsh reality of global logistics is that corporate boardrooms speak the language of profit and loss. If a sailor's aching back doesn't get their attention, the cost of an emergency deviation certainly will.
Because when a medical emergency escalates on a ship in the middle of the ocean, you can't just call an ambulance. The ship itself has to become the ambulance.
Exactly. When a crew member suffers a severe stress fracture or a rapidly deteriorating case of pneumonia, both of which are directly exacerbated by this deficiency, the captain is legally and morally obligated to seek immediate medical attention. This triggers what the industry calls a P&I medical case.
And P&I stands for Protection and Indemnity Right. It's the specialized mutual insurance that covers third-party liabilities and crew welfare in the maritime world.
Right. And when a P&I case forces a ship to alter its course to reach a port with a hospital, the financial bleed is astronomical.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's break down the exact math of a single voyage deviation that Captain Sharma outlines. Let's take a VLCC, a very large crude carrier.
Okay, let's do it.
When you are dealing with a VLCC hauling 2 million barrels of crude oil, the sheer physics of moving that mass through the water requires an unbelievable amount of energy. A ship that size burns roughly 70 tons of heavy fuel oil every single day just to maintain speed.
70 tons?
Yeah, so imagine that vessel is crossing the Indian Ocean and the captain has to divert course to drop off a critically ill crew member. Even a really short, highly efficient 6-hour diversion adds approximately 17.5 tons of fuel consumption to the voyage. At an average bunker fuel price of $550 per ton, that is almost $10,000 burned in just a few hours, in fuel alone.
And fuel is just the raw material. It doesn't account for the monetization of time.
Exactly. Commercial ships operate on strict charters. If a VLCC is on a spot charter rate of $70,000 a day, those 6 hours of lost time translate to roughly $17,500 in off-hire charges.
Money the ship owner is actively losing because the cargo isn't moving?
Right. So before you even see land, a single sick crew member has cost you nearly $30,000.
Then you actually reach the unscheduled port. You cannot simply parallel park a supertanker.
Definitely not.
You have to hire local maritime pilots who understand the specific shoals and currents of that harbor. You have to contract powerful tugboats to physically push the ship into place.
Which isn't cheap.
No, and you have to pay port agency fees to handle the local customs paperwork. That instantly adds tens of thousands of dollars to the invoice.
And we haven't even paid the hospital yet. You have the actual medical bills for the sailor, which in certain jurisdictions can run well into the 6 figures.
Yeah, easily.
Plus, maritime law dictates the ship cannot sail if it is under its minimum safe manning requirement. So the company has to rapidly fly out a substitute crew member at the last minute, paying premium airfare, while also paying for the medical repatriation of the sick sailor back to their home country.
When you tabulate the fuel, the lost time, the port fees, the medical bills, and the flights, the industry data reveals that a single medical deviation can easily cost upwards of $180,000.
$180,000 over a vitamin deficiency that could be solved with a pill that costs pennies a day.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights a massive, glaring paradox in corporate risk management.
Yeah, it really does.
The shipping industry is rightfully obsessed with safety. Seafarers are subjected to random, unyielding drug and alcohol testing. The protocols are incredibly strict because an intoxicated sailor poses an immediate, catastrophic threat to a billion-dollar asset.
But the irony is that shipping companies aggressively police the breathalyzer, while completely ignoring the structural integrity of their crew's bones and immune systems. They are guarding against the acute, unlikely risk of a drunk navigator, while totally ignoring the chronic, statistically guaranteed risk of biological failure.
A failure that is actively bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars from their bottom line.
Exactly.
And this physiological failure connects directly to the most prominent new initiative in corporate shipping, which is mental health.
Wait, isn't the shipping industry already trying to tackle mental health with modern tech? I mean, over the last few years, major shipping companies have finally realized that trapping people in steel boxes in the middle of the ocean for 9 months is incredibly isolating.
Yes, they have.
So they have started rolling out these massive corporate wellness programs. You see maritime companies investing in mobile apps, psychological questionnaires, and gamified team-building exercises. It's kind of like trying to fix a leaky pipe by making the plumber play a video game.
That is a perfect analogy. The intention is good, but the execution completely misses the biological root of the problem. Captain Sharma provides a really sharp critique of these initiatives.
What does he say?
From the crew's perspective, these corporate mental health apps feel profoundly intrusive. The maritime industry runs heavily on short-term contracts.
Okay.
If a sailor logs into a company-mandated app and checks a box saying they feel depressed or anxious, their immediate fear is that the crewing agency will see that data and simply refuse to rehire them for the next voyage.
So it feels like surveillance, not support.
Exactly.
If you are an exhausted engineer who just worked a 12-hour shift in a deafening 110-degree engine room, the absolute last thing you want to do is open an iPad and tell your multinational employer about your feelings.
But the larger issue is that an app cannot fix a chemical void in the brain. Vitamin D is not just a bone builder, it is a powerful neurosteroid.
Really? A neurosteroid?
Yes, it actively regulates the enzyme tyrosine hydroxylase, which your brain requires to produce dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. It also plays a vital role in synthesizing serotonin.
So this is pure biology.
Pure biology.
If a sailor hasn't synthesized vitamin D in 6 months because they are trapped inside a ship, their brain literally lacks the raw chemical materials required to regulate mood, sleep architecture, and energy levels.
That is the core disconnect. Low levels of vitamin D are clinically proven to cause severe fatigue, poor sleep, and depression-like symptoms.
Wow.
The shipping companies are scratching their heads wondering why their crews are depressed, handing them a gamified wellness app, and completely ignoring the fact that the crew is experiencing a massive, system-wide hormone shortage.
You cannot treat a chemical deficiency with a video game. It's biological sabotage. The company is treating the symptom of low mood with corporate HR tools instead of treating the root biological cause with basic medicine.
Which is why the text argues that testing and supplementing vitamin D is essentially stealth mental health care.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it, stealth mental health care.
Yeah, because when a maritime doctor runs a routine blood panel and says, your vitamin D is low, take this supplement, it carries zero stigma.
Right, it's just a vitamin.
Exactly. It is a purely physiological intervention. The sailor doesn't feel like their psychological stability is being questioned. There's no fear of losing their job over a mental health disclosure.
Yeah.
You fix the biology, the brain gets the neurosteroids it needs to produce dopamine, the mood improves naturally, and the company has genuinely supported their crew without ever violating their privacy.
It is a profound realization. So what does this all mean? If an industry is bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars per incident with frail bones, immune crashes, and pervasive depression, how exactly do they plug the hole?
Well, Captain Sharma lays out a highly pragmatic 5-step mitigation plan that requires very little structural change to implement.
Okay, let's hear it.
Step 1 is routine testing. Seafarers already undergo mandatory pre-employment and periodic medical exams. The industry simply needs to mandate the inclusion of a serum 25-OHD test in those exams.
Let's clarify what that specific test is for you listening, because it's not just a generic screen.
Right. Serum 25-OHD measures calcifidiol, which is the pre-hormone form of vitamin D circulating in your blood. Because it has a long half-life of about 15 days, it is the single most accurate barometer of a patient's true body sores, rather than just what they ate that specific morning.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it provides a definitive, objective baseline.
So you simply add that one highly accurate chemical marker to the blood work they are already getting. What's step 2?
Step 2 is targeted supplementation. For anyone whose levels come back low, the company physician prescribes a daily supplement, typically 1,000 to 2,000 international units of vitamin D3 paired with calcium to maximize absorption.
Very straightforward. And step 3 tackles the shipboard reality, which is nutrition, right?
Exactly. Corporate procurement departments need to adjust the supply chains. They must mandate that ship's cooks have continuous access to fortified foods, milks, and naturally rich sources that can survive the logistics of long voyages.
Because they cannot rely solely on the random assortment of dry goods picked up in port.
Right. Step 4 is about empowering the crew through awareness. You have to actively educate seafarers on the physics of sun exposure.
Like the shadow rule you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. If an engineer actually gets an hour of off-duty time during daylight, they need to know that standing behind the bridge glass won't help them. They need to find a safe zone on the exterior deck where PPE isn't mandated and actually get direct, unfiltered sunlight on their skin.
And finally, step 5 is data tracking.
Yes. To convince the most stubborn corporate boards, Maritime companies need to start explicitly coding P&I medical deviations.
Okay, how so?
When a ship loses $180,000 diverting for a severe respiratory infection, the medical officers need to track whether that sailor was severely vitamin D deficient. By linking the biological data to the financial losses, you build an undeniable empirical business case for prevention.
You show the executives that the cost of testing the entire crew for a decade is cheaper than a single 6-hour diversion for one sick sailor.
Exactly. But this raises an important question because Captain Sharma is a realist. He notes that the shipping industry moves slowly. Multinational regulations take years to change.
True.
So his immediate advice is for seafarers to take personal responsibility. Until companies mandate this, sailors need to advocate for themselves. They need to walk into their local clinic before a voyage, demand the 25 OHD test independently, and just pack their own supplements in their duffel bag.
Because at the end of the day, it is your skeleton, your immune system, and your brain on the line.
It really is. It is a striking example of how the macro logistics of the world run entirely on the microbiology of the people operating it. You cannot divorce the human animal from the industrial machine.
No, you can't. We started out looking at the great maritime paradox, how a workforce surrounded by brilliant open skies is systematically starved of sunlight. We explored the physics of how thick steel and safety gear act as a Faraday cage for UVB radiation, creating a hidden biological deficit.
Right.
We saw how that deficit forces the human body to cannibalize its own bones for calcium and shuts down the immune system's ability to fight off basic infections. We followed the financial thread, watching a biological crash escalate into a $180,000 corporate nightmare of burned fuel and lost time.
Yeah, the costs are staggering.
And we discovered that the key to genuine mental health at sea isn't a corporate wellness app, but providing the brain with the basic neurostorage it needs to function. Thank you for coming on this deep dive with us today.
It really completely reframes how you look at the economics of occupational health.
It really does. And we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If billion-dollar shipping companies track their fuel consumption down to the exact dollar and the exact ton, but they are entirely overlooking the fundamental biological fuel of their own crew.
Yeah.
Wait, let me rephrase that. They track the ship's fuel perfectly, but they ignore the human fuel. What other completely preventable chronic health risks are being ignored right now in high-stakes remote industries simply because they lack the immediate shock value of a failed breathalyzer?
It's a great question.
Next time you picture a massive cargo ship sailing under a blazing sun, remember what is quietly happening to the human biology hidden in the shadows beneath the deck.